Are there any additional amendments to the bill or to its title? Gentleman from St. Mary's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I got an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 173626/1.
Amendment number 1.
So be considered a reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What this amendment does is strike the language in the bill dealing with deed restrictions on the affordable dwelling. What this bill aims to do is 25% of the units, I guess that's 1 out of every 4, are supposed to be restricted in the price to 60% of the median income for that area. It restricts the deed and how much the property can escalate. Now, I'm really looking forward to this debate because the committee, I think, agrees with me. Because as drafted, it came in at 50%. Now the bill is amended to 25. So they're moving in the right direction. I'm just asking them to take the other 25 off. And the reason is for the people that own houses, this is a bad decision to restrict how much the property can increase in price. Think about it. We're going to have a buyer buy at today's interest rates, which, let's face it, over the last 10, 20 years are historically high. And then they can't get the property appreciation caused by high rates of inflation. It limits that. If you have a neighbor in one of these units, why would they fix up their property and maintain it? Why would they invest in it and improve it if the property can never be worth market value? And I was reminded when this bill came up of a story of my friend Juliet. Juliet was a woman. She lives in St. Mary's. She made the costly mistake of taking a promotion from her job and making a little extra money. And what that did was it put her off the welfare cliff there, and she ended up losing her Section 8 voucher. And at the time, in the unit she was renting, it was $1,350 a month. So I get a phone call. She's like, I need to find another place to live. I said, well, I can help you with that. What are you looking for? How much can you afford? She's like, I can afford $1,000 a month. So she came out, and we looked at 3 or 4 different condos and another townhouse. And, nothing really piqued her interest. And she's like, I never really lived in a condo. I have a townhouse now. I just can't afford it. And I said, well, have you ever thought about buying this unit? Maybe you can buy it. She said, oh, no, I can't afford that. I don't have any money. I've been on Section 8 my entire life. And I said, well, maybe I think you can. So after about 3 or 4 months, we end up rehabbing her credit. And I'm happy that she ended up buying that house on a USDA loan, 0% down. Her payment was $815 a month. This happened right before COVID, like 2019. She saved $500 a month. I was reminded of how this story plays with this bill because about 2 weeks ago, I get an email Zestimate from Zillow. Everything I deal with, I always list on Zillow. I get an email. That house has increased in value by $75,000. Now, this woman had nothing, and now she is sitting on some equity. I don't know why we wouldn't allow her to attain that equity. That's why I'm pushing this amendment. I think it's a good amendment, and ask you for a green vote on it.
Floor
Thank
leader.
you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I again appreciate the gentleman sharing the amendment with the committee, and I'll try to be brief. The scenario he described has nothing to do with the bill. This bill has nothing to do with people who buy homes that are already existing and they're owners of a single unit or a single family home, and now, we're worried that the value can't appreciate because there's a deed restriction. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the ability of developers to build new, usually it's going to be new rental housing buildings, and there's going to be a deed restriction that a certain percentage of those new units that are rental units have to be affordable in the deed for at least 40 years. This may sound strange to some of you. This is a totally normal way to do prolonged affordability. Basically, every project that we have that's funded by DHCD or the federal government in the state of Maryland has these deed restrictions in there. They're very normal, and it has nothing to do with people's inability to build equity or build wealth in homes that they purchase. That's not what we're talking about. And if any of those rental units were converted to an ownership opportunity, that's something that the buyer would know when they purchase the unit. They could bake that into the purchase price. What this amendment would do is gut all the affordability provisions of the bill. I would urge the body to resist it. The whole point of the bill is to provide the density bonuses as an incentive to get levels of affordability because we desperately need it. We need housing for our firefighters. So, for example, 60% AMI is a firefighter or a police officer in Frederick County. 60% AMI is a married couple in Allegheny County who one is a retired or disabled veteran, and the other one works part-time and takes classes at Frostburg College. 60% AMI in St. Mary's would be a single mom who's a school teacher. These folks need our help. They're not low income. They're not trash. They need us, and they need us to vote right on this amendment.
Madam Speaker.
I don't know who got up first. Gentleman from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Floor Leader, you just talked about a lot of local jurisdictions. I'm reading in the fiscal note, it says this bill is expected to be implemented with existing resources in many jurisdictions based on information received from a small number of jurisdictions. Were any of those jurisdictions that you just mentioned part of the feedback and the development of this bill?
Floor Leader.
I can't speak for the fiscal note drafters, but what I can say is that we took amendments and thoughts and feedback from jurisdictions across the state, rural, urban, suburban, red, blue, and everything in between. This is not a partisan issue. As I mentioned, Governor DeSantis, Montana.
It doesn't mean he's right. I don't care about Ron DeSantis.
Okay.
It doesn't mean he's right, okay? I don't care. We're talking about this bill right here, right now in Maryland. I don't care about Florida. I don't care about Ron DeSantis. Just because I'm a Republican standing up, I don't care about Ron DeSantis. Let me say that again. Okay, I don't care about Ron DeSantis.
Okay, we heard that
Thank
4
you.
times.
Well,
okay.
So have we.
Okay, you have something else to say?
So my question is,
go ahead.
are those local jurisdictions that you talked about part of the formulaic equation and the development of this bill?
Yes.
They were. They were part. Every one of those ones that you just talked about.
Are you
based
asking
on the language of this bill, it doesn't really sound like it.
You're reading the fiscal note, and I think every fiscal note takes a sampling of local jurisdictions when they try to comprise what the costs are going to be for localities. That's what you're reading. But you're asking me a different question, which is, did we consult with jurisdictions across the state in crafting the bill? And the answer is yes.
This bill specifically states information received from a small number of jurisdictions. I'm trying to get at the heart of what those jurisdictions were.
Madam Speaker.
Chairman.
Okay, I just want to differentiate. The fiscal note writers are not on the committee staff. They're not subcommittee members, they're not committee members. So the fiscal note writers, right, they reach out to a wide range of people and get feedback to come up with the fiscal note. As you know from your work on the Economic Matters Committee, the legislators also take feedback, right, through the hearings, through subcommittee work sessions, full committee work sessions from a variety of jurisdictions. In this case, in addition to hearing from a lot of jurisdictions individually, of course, we heard from the Maryland Association of Counties. They were involved in every work session on this bill. We had a full committee hearing that went on over an hour, and then at least 3 detailed subcommittee meetings where they went through the bill, and MACO was a participant in all of those. So I can't speak to the fiscal note because the committees, the legislators, as you know, do not write the fiscal notes. The fiscal note, if I can answer your question, Delegate?
Sort of.
The fiscal note, right, is their estimate of what costs might be for state or local governments and the small business impact. That's sort of aside from how we work the legislative process, as you know. So you can quote the fiscal note to me all you want, but that is not representative of the committee's work. That's representative
part of the legislation. It's part of the decision-making process on whether we pass this legislation or not, or accept amendments or not. So it is part of the legislation. It is part of the development process. So I appreciate your comments, sir.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question or something I'm very unclear about that perhaps my friend from Montgomery County could resolve. So the amendment relates to deed restrictions. Is that correct? I mean, that's my understanding from the gentleman from St. Mary's County. He wants to eliminate sections of the bill that specifically reference restrictions placed in deeds about how parcels of property can be priced, essentially, or what they can be priced at.
What the amendment does is it strikes the affordability requirements from the bill. Now, all the affordability requirements in the bill are deed restricted because that's how affordability requirements are done in the housing context. But the word deed restricted is not what's struck in the amendment. You can check it on the floor system. Okay. It strikes all the affordability requirements altogether.
So if I'm a developer already, I already hold the deed to a project in Montgomery County, Baltimore County, Allegheny County, whatever. I'm not going out and acquiring something new with the intent to hopefully invoke the provisions of this bill to help me finance, to help me maybe get past some local zoning concerns and be able to build my affordable project. I already own it. I got it. I own a deed. I own this land. And I want to apply to do these things. How are you going to enforce the affordability requirements through a deed?
They could get a new deed drafted. As you know, it's not difficult to go to a real estate attorney or anything to redraft the deed to add the affordability restrictions if they want the density bonuses. If they don't want the density bonuses, they're great. They're good to go with their existing deed, and they can roll on right ahead, and I hope they build some great units. If they want the density bonuses and the goodies that are in this bill, they need to guarantee affordability for 40 years.
So Joe Blow LLC already owns the 50-acre area near a transportation-oriented development, train station, whatever it may be. And now Joe Blow LLC is going to say, well, I have to go and prepare a new deed that transfers the property to myself with the restrictions in the bill.
That's right. I've drafted probably 700 of deeds like this. I think they cost an average of maybe $50 to $225, depending on how scrupulous the lawyer is.
Now, come on now. You bill more than that for 5 minutes of your time. I know that.
No.
Now, come on now.
If they want the bonus, they would have to get a new deed. If they don't want the bonus, they can roll on right ahead.
So when you say that what this is doing is related to rental units, people who rent properties don't get deeds. They don't have deeds. So couldn't you simply do this by an agreement with the developer that says so they don't have to do anything with the deed. They don't have anything, because the deed runs with the property forever, in theory. So when you do this via deed, now for the next decades and decades and decades, and we have no idea what these communities are going to look like 30 years from now. I hope none of, well, I shouldn't say that. If some of us are still in this room 30 years from now, good for you. I won't be here. But 30 years from now, we have no idea how this will look. But if you put it in the deed and you say it's a deed restriction forever, then it's going to run with that property. Wouldn't it make more sense to simply just do it and say, hey, if you want the density bonuses, as you put it, you have to execute an agreement when we finance, or when you do your zoning app and you say, I invoke this provision of state law to get around local zoning control. I have to do an agreement that says if I rent these properties, keyword rent, if I rent them, then I have to keep them affordable under whatever calculation you've come up with. On the other hand, if 30 years from now these things are just sold, maybe I use this instead of building an apartment building, maybe I used it to build detached or detachable townhouses, a row of townhouses after a row of townhouses. People want to buy those things 20 years from now. I don't have to restrict in my deed that I can only sell them at 60% of average median income, because now I've gotten no value out of the real estate investment. I don't understand why the committee, if what the goal is to allow people to rent units at affordable prices, why not just do that rather than restrict the land through a deed through all the permutations of what it may become?
Thank you for that. Again, I don't think we're on the amendment because the amendment doesn't strike deed restrictions. So if you wanted to put in an amendment, I don't think you're going to have time to get it drafted, but to put in an amendment to make it a pinky promise or some other contract, that would be off the amendment. What this does is strike the affordability requirements altogether, and as I've said, that's a really bad idea.
But you understand the gentleman's concern. He's not standing up and saying, I want to strike affordability requirements. He has to deal with the vehicle as you've given it to him, and I just don't understand why the committee would do that. If the concern is I want affordable rents for people who need to live in this community, I support that. But what you're doing through the vehicle that you have is you're sort of conflating rents with real estate that people own. People buy real estate for it to appreciate into the market. That's what the gentleman from St. Mary's County is talking about, is people build generational wealth through I made an investment in a home, a townhome, a piece of property, and I was able later at time to transfer that and get a value out of it. He's not talking about rents. So are you saying that the only thing we can do with this amendment is talk about rents instead of the ability to transfer the properties or units within the global development 20 years down the road and make a profit?
I'm saying that we're getting a little bit off track of the amendment, which strikes the affordability requirements. What you're talking about and what the gentleman did discuss are deed restrictions, which are how we restrict the price over time at AMI for housing in the state already. This may sound novel. It's actually totally benign and totally boring. This is how every housing project that's built that has long-term affordability, which is everyone that gets LIHTC, everyone that gets DHCD dollars, they're all guaranteed to be affordable for a certain period of time, and they all include deed restrictions. And the reason they include deed restrictions is because if ownership ever changes, we want it in the deed. We don't want it to be a pinky promise between Delegate Stewart and the minority leader.
Well, there's ways that we can do that as well, outside of deeds. But I guess maybe we are talking cross-purpose and when the conversation at that. You're talking about how to provide rental housing. But the bill doesn't say it's just about rental housing. The bill also says it may be building, quote unquote, and I believe in it, affordable housing for people to own. I may be a developer who says where I live, I just want to build a 250 unit apartment building. No one's ever going to buy their apartment. You wouldn't buy an apartment, so you're going to be constrained by those rent restrictions, and I get that. The bill also talks about people who might want to build single-family homes, detached row homes, townhomes, things that people can rent, but oftentimes people choose to buy. And the restrictions in the bill that says, when I do the new deed, I'm Joe Blow LLC, and I do the new deed to myself and says, I can never set a price for a unit in my development for the length of this period that exceeds that AMI restriction, I am crippling my ability to build single-family sellable homes. All I can do at that point in time is apartments or condos or something that someone's not going to own through a separate deed to them. They're just going to have a right to stay there through a lease.
If Mr. Blow wants to
He's a
create,
good guy.
he sounds like it. If he wants to create some single-family ownership opportunity or condos or whatever he wants to do that's outside the rental context, and he already owns the deed, and he wants to go forward, and he doesn't want to offer any deed restrictions, he can do it. This bill does not circumscribe his ability whatsoever. But if he wants the goodies in the bill, he wants those density bonuses, then yes, we want a firm deed restriction of affordability, just like every other affordability guaranteed in the state of Maryland.
And I appreciate that. And thank you. I appreciate it. And that, Madam Speaker, I think that's where we're at. If Mr. Blow, in my friend from Montgomery County's characterization, if he decides that under the current existing rule he can build 150 townhomes for that teacher, for that firefighter, for that small family, maybe they don't want to live in an apartment for the next 20 years. Maybe they want to have the American dream, buy their own home, build some equity in it. And the current existing scheme says you can only have 150. But if you choose to do this bill, you can add another 50 on. And that makes your project doable. But you can never sell those homes at that elevated rate. That's going to depress and end that market. People who want to get into that market of providing townhomes, single-family homes, affordable ones, are not going to use this bill. It's just going to be for apartments. And so think about that. Nothing wrong with living in an apartment. I've lived in an apartment. Everybody I know has lived in. I grew up in an apartment until I was 11 years old, 12 probably. Nothing wrong with that. But the dream in many communities, unless you're living in Manhattan, the dream is to get something that you own and that you build equity in. And I think that the provisions of this bill, the way it's construed, will make that more difficult. I appreciate the gentleman's amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman from Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A very important bill, and I appreciate a second bite at the apple, or the second apple. Floor Leader, a couple questions.
Floor Leader.
Good to see you again. Good afternoon by this point.
Thank you, and this is an important bill, and there are parts of this I support. So what the minority leader was talking about is compelling, and I think it does speak to an additional concern on the bill. Every deed restriction that I'm aware of comes through the lens of either DHCD, having a low-income housing tax credit project, or maybe it's USDA rural development, where you have federal dollars that fund the construction of affordable housing. So my question to you is this, and it does relate to the amendment. Does DHCD have the ability to provide 100% of affordable housing through deed-restricted projects that qualify for their low-income housing tax credit and related subsidies that relate to this bill, and why the amendment's here?
You're asking if DHCD and the federal government can team up to fund a project that's 100% affordable with deed restrictions.
I'm saying, can DHCD provide 100% of the affordable housing solutions for our state through these deed-restricted low-income housing tax credit projects? Because look, the bill talks about what's a qualifying project. Well, qualifying project is only ever going to be deed restricted, and the only deed restricted projects that I'm aware of that come through DHCD are ones that say here are the ability for you to get dollars for a mortgage through tax credits, and I'm questioning whether or not that's even possible. I'll ask a second question after you answer the first one, which I think the answer is no. DHCD will never have enough financial resources to provide for 100% of the state's affordable housing shortage.
That's absolutely correct. I'm with you 100%. DHCD will never be able to close the $100,000 existing shortfall that is only going to go up year after year, and that's why the bill is here, because we're trying to team up as a state with the private sector. We're trying to, this bill ultimately is about peeling back government regulation. We're trying to get the government out of the way so the private sector and the state government and counties and nonprofits can work together collectively to solve the problem. And that's why, as the author of the amendment mentioned, that's why the committee decided to lower the affordability numbers in the bill as it came in from the governor, because we want to make sure that these projects that we're shooting for are actually attainable and that they pencil out.
But Mr. Floor Leader, I think that the maker of the amendment is trying to say that somebody who has the interest in providing affordable housing, they probably will never be able to engage with DHCD, because I think it's a sophisticated process to begin with. So you're limiting the number of developers that could even participate in getting these goodies that you're talking about. So your answer to the question is correct, and I believe in my heart that the state will never have enough money to do this with these sort of deed-restricted projects. So it goes to my second question, which is the minority leader's point. You have a developer who wants to provide affordable housing. We'll use air quotes, because affordable in a private setting doesn't necessarily fall in line with percentages or what does the rent amount need to be. But how do you incentivize developers to provide affordable housing under this bill without having to attach themselves to rigorous state and federal programs that are in fact deed restricted for 40 or 50 years?
You give them a density bonus, and that's what the bill does.
Okay, and are you saying that I can do that? Well, you're saying a developer could get a bonus, this density bonus, without going to DHCD and getting a deed-restricted low-income housing tax credit project?
That's exactly right.
Okay, well, that's the pinky promise. That's okay. We're going to agree to do something, but who are we making the pinky promise to? If I'm the developer and I want to develop 80 units for affordable housing, how am I putting in my deed something that the state's going to be satisfied with?
All you have to do is put something in your deed to say that a certain percentage required by the bill to get the density bonus remains affordable for those 40 years, and you're liable if you end up going back on that. It's a totally normal, and in fact, I'll give you an example. So Montgomery counties, it was mentioned on the floor yesterday, are these, manufactured homes, or these, projects going to go into my own district? Well, Montgomery County, for 50 years, has had an MPDU program, a moderately priced dwelling unit program, where every developer that builds a new building in Montgomery County has to offer either 12.5% affordable units or 15% affordable units near transit. That's deed restricted with no DHCD involvement. So I know this may sound weird to the minority party when I'm describing, but it's
Far
totally
from weird.
normal.
I understand what you're doing.
Okay.
I'm asking, who are you making the promise to? Because I can sit down with my deed and do anything with it. I guess I'm recording the deed, but doesn't somebody with the state who wants a developer to get the goodies make a promise? And like, how does this bill imagine that happening outside of DHCD's low-income housing tax credit deed-restricted mortgages that are very well understood by myself?
So the way this works is you get a new deed, you record it with the deed office in your county, and the enforcement authority would generally rest with the local planning commission. So just like any other provision that you put in the deed, like HOA, for example, restrictions generally go in deeds. And if an HOA violates that, they can be sued either by residents or they can be sued by the county official or whomever. What we're talking about really does not involve DHCD at all. These are local deeds, they're local decisions, they're registered with the county, they're enforced by the county.
All right. Madam Speaker, I support the amendment. I think what we're talking about is affordable housing outside of the deed restrictions that exist in programs that I'm familiar with through DHCD. And if we want as a state to provide this affordable housing, you're going to have to do it with private developers. You're going to have to do it with private money. If the incentive is you get the goodies of density, in the exchange of sitting down with my attorney or a developer's attorney and say, put in the deed that I'm going to have 25% or 50% of this be affordable housing. My only question is going to be, what does affordable housing mean in the context? What does percentages really have to do with the conversation? Because who's checking what the deed actually does? Under low-income housing tax credit projects, DHCD every year does audits, understands what's going on. So if we're trying to incentivize private developers under the circumstance, I don't actually think that's what this bill does. I don't think you're trying to incentivize private developers.
On the amendment?
On the amendment, I think he's trying to address what a private developer is looking at, how they would try to take advantage of the opportunities, goodies, so to speak. And let's try to move the amendment, and thank you very much.
Maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just want to wrap this up. Fascinating debate. You know, colleagues, let me tell you how this is going to work out in practice. You're going to have Mr. Joe Blow, LLC, for mathematical purposes. Let's say he builds a row of 4 townhouses. 25% of them need to be deed restricted. You want to make a bet that that's the townhouse that my friend Juliet ends up with? I'll throw another wrinkle on this point. You know, it's deed restriction in the price of the resale for 40 years. How the heck is that tax assessed by SDAT? Because the last time I checked, SDAT tax assess things based on relative property sales. So you have 3 townhouses that are escalating in price value. You have one that is escalating taxes, but not allowed to be sold at a higher rate for 40 years. And I know the committee agrees with me on this because keep in mind, the bill was originally drafted for 50%, now it's cut back to 25%. And just for the record, I know Ron DeSantis. Original Freedom Caucus guy, governor of Florida. I know him to be a free market capitalist, and I'm thinking he would agree with me and vote green on this, if that made a difference to you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Roll call.
Madam Speaker.
Is everyone recorded their vote? Clerk will take the call. The amendment fails. Are there any additional